How's everybody doing? Good. I am going to spend a couple of minutes framing this exciting moment that we're in, this challenging moment that we're in related to higher education and all of the new technological tools that are constantly influencing our decisions and discussions. But I would first just like to take a moment of privilege just to say thank you very much to every single person in this room for doing the work that you do. I have the pleasure of getting a chance to work across the country to be able to find out all the great things that are taking place to support student success and college completion, and we are frequently highlighting CVHEC in the work that you're doing, and CVHEC has been a part of Complete College America since 2015. So I just want to thank Ben and his team. Thank you so very much, CVHEC team, for the invitation. And I really plan to have to really just kind of frame this conversation. First, let me just share that I am not a technologist by trade in no kind of way. I'm actually an institutional practitioner who now has the opportunity to talk about how institutions can be better. And I'm originally from California, Southern California, and so now I get a chance to come back home and be able to share these challenges that other states and systems are experiencing and being able to highlight the things that work. So what I want to be able to do is just kind of walk you a little bit through what we're seeing broadly. This conversation that I'll have with Dr. Lawrenson is not strictly about AI. It's how do we use these various technical tools, technological tools to advance the work that you're already committed to. So it's not two different agendas. It's one agenda around student success and what do we use, what do we have at our fingertips to be able to do that work. Sound like a plan? All right, easy enough. All right, so let me just, for those of you who are not familiar with Complete College America, we were founded in, almost 17 years ago with the goal of maybe getting 10 or so governors committed to a college completion agenda. The map is nearly full. California is not, the governor has not signed on as a member yet. However, we have 3 big consortia of institutions, CVHEC being one of them. So if you want to know who is CCA, you are a part. If you're in this room, you are a part of the Complete College America Alliance. Whether you're a public institution or a private institution, our services are at your disposal, and we're happy to help in the work that you do. And I shared this a little bit earlier. We get a chance to go around the country and talk to institutions about what works and what doesn't work. And one of the biggest things that we've seen very frequently is that one of the big ideas and one of the biggest challenges in front of us is that how people talk about college is very different. And so for those of us who are a little older, have a little bit more gray in our beards and hair, typically you see college looking like, these ivory towers with, ivy growing down the walls and students outside playing hacky sack. But the reality is that most college students experience programs where they're trying to upskill or reskill. They're at associate degree granting institutions. They're at community colleges, and they're at 4-year regional institutions, public institutions. And so one of the things that we did fairly recently was start to change that narrative. And what you see up here on the screen is part of the Complete College Photo Library, which is now a free open source available piece. We went around to different colleges around the country just to showcase what college really looks like for returning adults and other individuals who have different experiences than the traditional experience. So just want to make sure you have access to that. Now, what am I finding out as I move around the country? A few different things. I think one of them, and it's one of the reasons why we do this work, is that when I talk to people this year around what has the last year been around higher education for you, most of them have talked about it like a Yelp review. They're basically like 1 star would not recommend. And they're saying that because if you think about what's happened over the past year and a half, it really has felt like 5 years. Think about what happened at the start of January. We had all these executive orders. All these other things that are taking place have really reshaped how we've had to do the work in front of us. And on a very personal level, I am the father of a high school senior who's about to make a decision to go to college. So I am literally watching a new generation of students who are digital natives have to experience institutions that are not technologically sound at all. And so as we've gone around to those institutions, he's asking questions that I would not have even thought of as a practitioner. and he's expecting different things from our institutions. What I will tell you, and I don't want this to make anyone feel bad because I'm talking at a national level, most institutions are not ready for the students that they serve right now, especially technologically. And that's why this conversation around AI is so important. So, if you don't know Complete College America very well, these are kind of our core ideas. We build systems, not isolated interventions. So we talk about what is a student experience? How do they identify a sense of purpose? How do we have the right structure in place? What does momentum look like to keep them moving? And when they go off the rails or off track for whatever reason, how do we get them back on track with support? And I share this with you because if you've heard about guided pathways or co-requisite support, which I saw in the video, or 15 to finish, that's the work that we've been doing over the past decade. And so you don't always hear the name, but we're always amplifying those institutions, those states, those systems that are doing that particular work. And so that's what we do. We scale and work with institutions to focus on high-impact practices. So as we talk about this work related to AI over the past 3 years or so, we've been laying out a few different kind of roadmaps for what this should look like. And feel free to take pictures if you need, but let me tell you, all of this information is open source if you go to completecollege.org, all of these publications are there. When I was a practitioner on campus, I did not have time to read the newest brief or long, peer-reviewed article about what was taking place. What I needed were quick toolkits, quick snapshots of what I should be doing. And so there are a number of things that we've been putting out related to AI and student success. And this might actually be a really good point to kind of frame this discussion because there are a lot of things happening related to AI around the infrastructure that needs to happen at institutions. A number of our presidents and system leaders were talking about faculty engagement, curriculum, how do you ensure students are learning. The lane that we are in is really that larger umbrella of student success. How will AI incorporate, allow us to accelerate and better enable our student success efforts? And so these publications that I'm referencing, the AI Divide and Attainment with AI, they all kind of map to those key things that I just showed a minute ago. How does AI support purpose? How does AI support structure, momentum, and support? And so that's the discussion that we're having so that individuals who are doing this work, who are committed to it, are making sure that they are implementing the right things, learning, sharing, evaluating, and making it better. These letters are kind of small on the screen, but I'll just kind of tell you some of the things that we've been doing. I've kind of referenced them a little bit. We've laid out a number of AI implementation guides, specifically related to those strategies as I've shared. We're actually hosting an AI and Student Success Summit a little later this summer. I think some of the CVHEC institutions have already applied. And so there's a lot of work that's taking place around how do we tell this story, including ensuring students are a part of that discussion. So we're making sure that we have a student advisory council that is really articulating this is what works for us, this is what we'd like to see, this is what an AI-enabled campus can potentially look like. And I really want to just spend a couple of seconds here because one of the publications that we put out was actually working with a series or a group of minority-serving institutions that overwhelmingly serve tribal colleges, Latino and Latina students, as well as HBCUs. And what came out of that was something very interesting when we talked to the faculty, the staff, and the students. Everybody's talking AI. Nobody's really laying out the details of how this actually takes place. And so when you go to one of those publications, this is in there multiple times, the first thing that we're realizing is that most institutions do not have a foundational idea of why they're doing this. How does it align with our mission? What policies are in place? How are we going to fund it? And how are we going to do the change management process of getting our folks to learn how to do this? Then you've got the kind of the IT infrastructure pieces. What does this mean for our security and privacy? We just don't want our information out there in the streets. What devices are going to be needed, et cetera. And then there's conversations around data. And if you look up there, it's like, who's going to manage this? How do these AI tools integrate and create a sense of interoperability with the things we've already paid for? So there's that conversation around tech stack and technology applications and integration. And then there moves into like the people part of that work. So that orange line right there, how are you training and onboarding people? So I heard a president earlier talking about the percentage of institutions and individuals that are doing this work. It's great to have 60% or 70% of the campus doing it. This is a leadership conversation. Everybody has to get engaged in this work. It is full stop. It's not a you get to choose if you do this or not. Institutions that do it will be at the forefront of higher education. Those that do not will be left behind. It is literally that clear on what's happening. And so you've got to think about how you're creating professional learning communities, how you're acquiring talent that can help the work continue, and then all the other things that are there. And then, of course, when I get down to the last section on student support, cultural and engagement, what are you building this thing to create? You know, is it to create alert systems? How do you create single information sign-on? How does it in fact impact student engagement and campus life? So there are all these different things that are taking place that have impact on the larger change management ideas of our campus and where we go. And so our colleagues at CVHEC said, you know, can you kind of tie this in a little bit to all these other things that are happening nationally? This big conversation around workforce alignment and educational alignment. And so we've been kind of articulating this as purpose first. How do we help students connect students to career success? And I'm going ahead and see if I can, all right. Sometimes it takes a second to kind of pick up. If not, I might have somebody flip for me. So when I think about this idea of purpose, the reality is that most students are still choosing majors in the most uninformed ways that we've been doing for 20 or 30 years. It's a couple different things. One, my mama and daddy or family said this is what I should do. My friends are saying this is a good major for me, or that sounds cool. That's literally what people are doing. I am not any different than these individuals, these students today. I tell this to people all the time. I'm from Southern California. I like science. I was good in water sports. I like to surf, so I should be a what? A marine biologist. You could not tell me I wasn't about to be the African-American Jacques Cousteau, you know. And then I was fortunate enough, after swirling between a couple institutions in California, so I went to Long Beach City College, and I went to Cal State Long Beach, then I transferred across the country to an HBCU, Clark Atlanta University. So I'm there, and I tell my advisor what I want to do, and she says, well, you know what? You should probably get an internship and see what this is really like. I was like, cool, that's what I wanted to do, be a marine biologist. She got me an internship at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I was going to be out on this research vessel for 3 months in the Gulf of Mexico, and it sounded like the sexiest thing in the world, and it sucked so bad. And all I kept thinking to myself was, why didn't somebody tell me that's what the job is? And I say that to you because now what's happening as we align this workforce conversation, people are asking, you know, what's the highest demand job? What's the job that's going to pay me a living wage? What's the job that's going to allow me and my family socioeconomic mobility? And most students don't know that. And honestly, if you ask most advisors, they don't know that. They tell you to go to the Career Center. So there's a lot of integration that needs to happen on this conversation. Go back one. And so when we talk about purpose first, really simply, it's about empowering students to identify their interests, explore possible careers, and understand job market data that's relevant. And so most institutions do not do this very well. Let me just tell you that. This is not a CVHEC, not a California issue. This is a national United States issue. And so this purpose first work is around from the time that a student applies to campus, how do they make decisions? How do they get exposed to the different things that are in front of them? How do we incorporate it into first-year experience courses? How does it become a part of their academic map? How do we create experiences for them, whether that's internships, networking, et cetera? How do they reflect and learn through that process? And then how do we ensure that ultimately that leads to some level of job placement or graduate school? So I'm not going to go deep into purpose first. I just wanted individuals to realize that these are things that are kind of aligning in the work. I will also share with you right now that we talk about not having either too much data or not enough data. The real problem is actionable data. Everything that we get is backwards facing. No one wants to hear that we're going to give you data a decade from now. You're talking about 6-year and 8-year graduation rates. People who come to school for a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree expect to be at a graduation in 4 years. Their mamas, grandmamas, all the folks who have helped to kind of scrounge together money, they're expecting a graduation in a short term, not a 5-point-something years. And so how do we make that happen? And this is where we are in the country as far as movement. Access and completion, actually doing a pretty good job of tracking that. Progression, the efficiency of the progression, and equitable outcomes, we're kind of on the bubble on whether we can correct that or whether we are collecting that and using it. And then cost and post-college outcomes, most states, institutions are behind on that. And now there's a larger conversation because, yes, we want them to do well socioeconomically from a mobility standpoint, but now there's a larger conversation around what does this mean for civic engagement? What does a college degree mean for all these things that are part of our work? And there's still this reality that there are so many individuals with some college and no degree. And that's really the opportunity for most of our institutions. That number is 43.1 million Americans that have started some kind of program and never finished. If you look at individuals under the age of 65, it's about 37 million individuals. That's the window, that's the space of opportunity that's in front of us. So, to bring this conversation full circle and to move into our discussion, I think the big thing around how does this AI thing influence and impact all the things we've been talking about. So one around, and these are just a couple of examples, and at the very top, if you can't see it, I'm just gonna read it to you. The fundamental and foundational principle of this is AI enhances, never replaces human capacity. And so you've got to figure out how these two pieces work in tandem with one another. So if we're thinking about proactive outreach and visibility, AI may be able to monitor all these different indicators across enrollment and grades and engagement, but you still need a real person to figure out what's the full context. How do you have meaningful conversations about these barriers? If you're thinking about things like pathways, AI may be able to generate a personalized academic roadmap for a student. If a student says, like one of the students who was up here speaking, I had to take time off to manage my family. I had a child, I got married. Well, they could potentially tell you this is the best way to get on track. However, an advisor needs to be there to help you navigate those changes and make informed decisions. If you're talking about support, you might be able to provide 24/7 kind of updates on how you find this and how you find that. A staff person still has to recognize those complex needs. When you think about interventions and predictive analytics, which has kind of been an exciting conversation for the past decade, yes, they can tell you and surface, signs of struggle, how many weeks ahead. However, you're going to need a team that is there to coordinate, preventive support, and mobilize those resources. And then when I think about institutional performance gaps, and I really like that term because we used to say equity gaps, or these are the problems with students. The problems that we have are not student-facing. The problems that we have are institutional problems. They are structural problems. More students can finish if we do a better job at what we're supposed to do. And so when you think about just creating disaggregated dashboards and all those other things around race and income and status, that's important. But ultimately, a team, an organization within the organization is going to have to investigate root causes, reallocate resources, and hold systems accountable. And so I wanted to just kind of show you how you start to piece this larger AI discussion with the larger strategic goal, which is student success, and how these things might be able to move us forward. I'm just going to share this. The last time that we hosted an annual convening was in San Francisco, in California, was in San Francisco in 2016. This year, we're actually hosting it back here. It's going to be in San Diego at the end of the year. And I'm just sharing that with you because there are a number of individuals at institutions, systems, and other states that have solved some of these problems, are trying to figure it out, or have made the mistakes and have the lumps to prove it, and can make sure you don't have to make those same mistakes. So just want to make sure I give you that bit of information. And I'll leave with this up here because I told you at the front end, all the things I'm talking about are available, resources are available, and our team is available to support you at Complete College America. So all you've got to do is go online and be able to see and download all the things that I just talked about. So with that, I have the pleasure of bringing to the stage Lisa Aguilera Lawrenson, who's going to just talk a little bit more about some of the things that I teed up. And I'm happy to kind of to be very candid and share how this is playing out nationally and hopefully open up the floor for some conversations. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Dhanfu, for providing that information for us and for really laying out the foundation of where higher education is heading. I would like us to go into a little bit more depth now regarding some of these issues. And so in terms of
depth.
Yes,
yeah, that's where it gets murky.
Yes, that is where it gets murky because we start getting into what we need to do as practitioners. And I loved how you talked about the fact that we need to really be looking at our practice in order for students to complete. So along those lines, what are the mistakes that you see that institutions are making when it comes to implementing AI for student success?
Where do I begin? I watch institutions do a few different things, and so I'm trying to just think about which order I would put them in. I think the first thing that the biggest mistake I think states, institutions make is that they chase the tool and not the problem. And it's so sexy when you go to a conference and someone's like, hey, we can help you solve that. And you've got all these vendors and they talk about all this stuff. And, you know, I came from an institution, Georgia State University, that everybody talks about nationally for closing the gaps across a number of different identities, et cetera. But the first thing that we had to do before we moved into predictive analytics and all that work was we had to figure out what's the problem we're trying to solve. And if you can't understand that, then you'll just kind of constantly be chasing the next tool. And so when you're trying to buy what a competitor bought without asking why and what they were trying to solve, you're going to make some huge mistakes. I would also say that part of the problem is that nobody talks about the governance. You know, typically what happens is, you know, it either falls in the category of either the student success space or the chief information officer. And frequently they're not talking to one another. And so it's like, who owns the data that's coming in from this process? Who audits it? Who's accountable ultimately for that work? And so I think you've got to start and work backwards with the outcomes, not the technology itself. So start with the problem, not the product. And then I think one of the things that's really important to also share is that related to AI is that AI has the potential, one of the mistakes that is a constant discussion point is that it tends to serve the students who need it least. Because we've got information about the folks who show up. We need to find out about the student who dropped out or the students whose GPA isn't where you want it to be, the students that haven't registered. So those, I think, are some of the biggest things that are the mistakes when people start this process.
Thank you. We also talked about Purpose First 2.0 and the idea that workforce alignment needs to happen at enrollment and not at graduation. And you used your personal example, which was really helpful. That's a significant cultural and structural shift for most institutions. What does it actually take for a campus to make that shift, and what gets in the way?
I have the pleasure of working with a lot of different institutional leaders, including a number of presidents. And I think that leadership matters, and having presidents who, you know, to implement it well and at scale at an institution, it requires a presidential will to make that happen. We don't even sign any MOUs of projects unless the president is like, I'm in on this. Because otherwise, you know how, you guys have been around colleges, campuses for years. You know how it works. All most folks do is wait out the president. You know what I'm saying? We know how long a president's tenure tends to be. So in many cases, people are like, all right, this guy's on the job for maybe 3 or 4 more years. And I think having a person who sees it as part of the strategic mission of the institution, that's key. I also think that part of the issue that we have that blocks implementation, especially around purpose first, because it starts to move in a couple areas. It's the academics, it's career counseling, it's advising, it's the data, it's all these different things that are taking place. And so there's fragmentation. You've got to have academic affairs, working with student affairs, working with the workforce folks, and working with IR, who has to provide some kind of framework. And so that fragmentation is probably where dreams go to die. And so even when you think about all those things, those are the things that get in the way, because someone ultimately has to decide. And if you don't know who that person is, it's just going to continue to roll down the hill without anyone doing it.
Thank you. You mentioned also the 37 million Americans with some college and no degree, and that number has really stayed with me since you spoke. So from a national standpoint, what would be a serious re-enrollment strategy? What would it look like? And what does it take to actually make that work? And what role does AI play in that?
I had to jot down something that you shared, because I think it's really important. When you put that big number on the screen and you say 41 million or 37 million that are under 65, these individuals are identifiable. The problem is they can be identified. We just don't have the structures in place to figure out who they are. And I think that's a data issue. We don't have any national data sets to be able to do this. Some states have been better than others in being able to identify students who stopped out of their institutions. But I think that the biggest challenge is just trying to round them up and identify where they are and do the outreach. And so having that information is critical. But we have to build that data infrastructure to find them first. And so when you talk about things like AI, it's well designed and well situated to do that thing, which is take the large volumes of information across, tax records and institutional dropout information and federal information around individuals who took out student loans, and to be able to aggregate that in some kind of way and give you a real snapshot of who's out there and who's available. And so it then enables us to then move from AI to personalized outreach. And I think that we've got to continue to think about that. There are so many individuals who are now in a situation where their jobs are no longer going to exist because of technology. And they don't even realize that's happening until it actually happens. And so in order for us to make that work, we've got to start the process now while they're in mechatronics or in these other areas, and start to say, here's some reskilling or upskilling that's going to be required. And you get that at your local community college or your local institution. So those needs around flexible scheduling and targeting students within a certain amount of credits, those are the data pieces that are going to be important to finding that big group of students that are out there.
CCA has documented something that you call the AI divide. And we serve a lot of students at community college who are already navigating significant challenges and disadvantages. What do institutions need to make sure of how AI can work for those students, not just the ones who already have those resources, but access?
I shared earlier, I went to 2 different schools before I ended up at the institution where I graduated. And I think so frequently the conversation is around who looks, like how do we take the students who are the best, who end up crossing the stage, who we all applaud and love and take pictures with their family, how do we make more of them? And it's important to acknowledge those students, but struggling students tend to look invisible. I mean, until they disappear. And so what we're really trying to figure out is what are the hiccups, the hurdles in the road, in that pathway that prevent students from getting to that end. And so we have to design these new technologies for the disengagement signals. Is it, a student who has beneath a 2.5 and doesn't register, at the window for next semester's registration? Are those the students that are most likely to not show back up? And so we've got to find ways to find those individuals and deal with the things that they may truly be going through. I mean, there's been a large movement around basic needs, but no one ever knows that someone needs a problem or it's going to be a problem until they're gone. And so I think all of those things have to be a part of it. I'm a former academic advisor. I've led academic advising units. Advisors are typically some of the most knowledgeable people of what's going on. They have to be empowered to act. And I think that ensuring those individuals can look at AI audits around outputs related to race and income, those individuals can help us solve those problems. I typically find there's somebody on campus who is sitting back, who's in this room today, who's like, if my president would just listen to me, I could literally tell them how to fix this thing. And they're not on any committee. They're not involved in any of the things that are needed to fix the problem.
I'm smiling since some of my folks are here. They might be thinking
Well,
that very thing.
I heard a whole lot of little giggles and laughs. So presidents, those are the people who know what's happening.
Absolutely. We have a room full here of system leaders, presidents, and faculty. If you could send every one of us back to our institution tomorrow with one specific action to take, what would it be?
That's a good one. I think there's a couple of things. I don't think it's one for me, but I think there are. I think you start off with just finding one gap that you can't explain with the current data. You know, I think, you know, I mentioned Georgia State University and is one of my institutions, so it's always a fallback for me. We didn't start off doing everything. We started off with, okay, there's an issue with learning communities. And then there's an issue with students who are not registering. And then there are students who are on the Hope Scholarship for the state of Georgia that are losing it. And so it's like, just find one thing that you can fix, and that one thing becomes the next thing. Everyone asks me the same question because philanthropies frequently come to us and say, who's ready? Which institutions are ready to do this thing? And so when I talk to campuses, very frequently they'll say, we could do that if we had money. And what I tell them over and over again is success begets success, which begets more resources. If you can show that you can do the one small thing, it leads to the next big thing, the next big project that can then allow you to move forward. And so that's probably what I would say is an important first step. I would also just quickly say refuse to accept not knowing as an institutional posture. It can't just, if people are constantly saying, we don't know why that's happening, like somebody's got to say, all right, this is what we've identified, and this is what we're really honing in on to get that answer. Those would be my first couple of steps in moving forward.
All right, I think that's about what we have time for at the moment. So were you, I think you were going to say something?
Yeah, I'm happy just to share that I said this at the podium, and I'll just say it again. Don't feel like you're in this by yourself. There are institutions that are working through these things. The institutions that matter most in the next decade will decide that their students deserve for them to try to do these things. And those institutions that say it's just a natural problem and we'll never be able to solve it are going to stay in this level of stagnation. So the AI can be an enabler, it can be an accelerant, and it is not like MOOCs or one of these other things where like it'll no longer be here. People are using it daily, and it's going to be something that's going to influence our work for the next generation.
Thank you so much. You gave me a lot to think about. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, everyone.